Okay, so can you guys hear me here? Anybody on Zoom, if you are having trouble hearing me, let me know. But otherwise, I will assume y'all can hear me. So I am Sheila Green. I'm an associate librarian with the Medical Sciences Library, TAMU Libraries. And I've done a few sessions on the new NIH data management policy and sharing and all of that kind of thing. Um, Most of those have been oriented more to the PIs that we're having to deal with. Oh my gosh, I have to get ready for this thing. What do I do? Um, a lot of the content here is that same kind of content, but I'm going to whip through the overview stuff and get a little bit more to the actual nuts and bolts. And okay, now that this thing is in place, what kinds of things have bubbled up? Um, I will make sure that you guys get copies of these slides afterwards. I have a lot of links in here that y'all can use to go off and explore further or get additional info. So for today, I'm going to share a few snippets from various conferences, do an overview, talk about some stuff that you can actually use for writing plans or actually complying with these as you're moving forward, and just kind of address some of the common questions that have come up. So these next few slides are directly from NIH's virtual conference that they did in February. I figured they were probably the best ones to explain, okay, why are we doing this? And, you know, what's the point and that kind of thing. So that the whole point of saying, okay, just like we want researchers to share the journal articles or the products of their research. Data is also a product of their research. And to the level that it can be shared, it should be to move science further along, advance just the general rigor and reproducibility of research, and increase opportunities for collaborating. You may come across somebody's data that's like, hey, that looks very, very useful to a different question that I want to answer. And what can I do to maybe take advantage of some of that data? And on the general public trust side of things, there's always challenges with getting trust from the public in research. There's a desire to increase transparency and just all of those kinds of things. But also make sure that research participants' data is properly protected and secured and so on. So that's where some of that comes into play as well. In a nutshell, as of January 25th, as part of the award process, you're submitting a data management and sharing plan as part of that, and then you comply with it. Is pretty much the general idea there. And what's in is basically research that supports science or that generates scientific data. So it's the factual material that is of sufficient quality to validate and replicate findings. So it's not a data dump of random files, throw them out in some repository and say, yay, I'm done. It needs to be something that someone can turn around and actually use, or at least get an idea of what that data is so that they can reach out to you and say, okay, what can we do to arrange using this data? And they're not interested in your lab notebooks or the post-it note on the computer screen, or preliminary stuff or peer reviews, or the physical things that you did. They're interested in the data portion of that. Timelines as far as when that sharing of data needs to take place is no later than your first publication or the end of the award. So if you haven't published yet, then by the time you're done with the award, you need to be getting out there and sharing that data. So whichever one of those comes first. How long to share is going to some degree depend on the repository as far as where you're sharing it. And any repository that you're sharing to is going to have policies about how long they're keeping it around. And if you're not seeing those policies, you probably want to find a different repository. So that could be, 5 years, 10 years, it just kind of depends. And just to kind of again clarify the what generates scientific data. It's basically, the research projects, some curriculum, some career development awards, small business awards, research center. So stuff that again, you're generating data. Training grants, fellowships, conference grants, they're not concerned about those. And there is a link there that's just basically a, is my research covered under this policy? And you can kind of look through and follow the little flow chart to see that. So again, just my overview. Here's my plain language version of all of this. There's 6 different elements, and it basically boils down to describe in your sharing plan, what data are you sharing? What tech are you using to manipulate that data? Statistical software, whatever. What standards are you using to describe that data that would help make it interoperable? And that's thinking in terms of metadata standards or naming conventions, those kinds of things that might be used across your discipline. Where is that data stored and or described? What are the rules for using it? Are there data use agreements involved? Is it totally open and public? What are the details there? And then who's responsible for making all of this happen? So those are the main elements of the plan. And just to kind of jump up there up front, acceptable reasons to not share. I don't want to is not one of the choices. You need to have some acceptable reasons. Sometimes if you're working with human beings, it could be the informed consent limitations. The patient specifically said, no, I don't want my stuff shared. And there may already be some existing consent limitations, maybe from some prior samples that you had that said, okay, yes, you can use it for this study, but not anything else. So that would be one of the prohibitions. Anything that would compromise or risk re-identification of a participant. So that doesn't mean you can't share any data on that project. You may be able to share aggregated data about the patients that are in your study, even if you can't share the information about Sheila Green or Bob Smith or whoever. There may be specific federal, state, local, tribal laws, regulations, policies, whatever, that prohibit disclosure of some information. So you may have some other policies or regulations that are going to trump that sharing, but you need to know what those are and be able to say, this is why I can't share. And there's just data sets can't practically be digitized for whatever reason. So that's just sort of the reasons why you can say I can't share, but you still will need to describe the why you can't share. So that first element, what data are you sharing? So in your sharing plan, you've got a section that says, okay, what type and amount of data are we collecting or using? So you're describing the modality. Is it imaging? Is it genetics data? Is it survey data? What's the level of aggregation? Is it individual or are we doing state level or something? And what degree of data has the data been processed? Is it straight raw data? Is it somewhere in between? You have the part about your rationale for what's being shared or not shared. And then you're describing, you don't have to go into all kinds of terrible detail, but you're at least describing the standards and documentation you're going to put with that data to describe it. Whether that's standards, we're going to share the protocols, we might have some code that we're going to put with it. If we're doing survey data, we'll include the surveys. So what are you putting with this data to help somebody figure out and interpret it? And then what related tools or software or code, what tech are you using with this data? Is there specialized tools, special genomic sequencing tools that you're using, or statistical software? How available is it? Is it open source that anybody could use, or is it proprietary software that someone's going to have to go out and buy? And this doesn't mean that you can't use, some proprietary software to do your own processing within your lab and then share it as an open source format that open source tools could use. You can always just say, yeah, we're going to use Excel for something, but when we share it, we're going to share the CSV file so that anybody can do whatever with it. So it's not a limitation. Again, you're just saying this is what we're doing. I have a link here. I won't bother clicking on it, but Texas A&M's departmental software has a huge laundry list of many, many, many tools that are available through the university and what their lifespans are and length of availability and so on. So that can be a tool if you need to know about, lifespan of statistical software or something like that. Okay, so what standards are you using to help make it interoperable? I'll come back and look at, I might be able to bring this up shortly, but this is again looking at those data formats and data dictionaries and common identifiers. Your discipline probably has standards about the way they describe things. But if there are standard file names and those variables in your file are always integers and they're always within certain ranges, that's where you're kind of describing those standards or the data elements. I think see if I can get to that quickly. Data elements. Okay, so this is an example, and there are many, many that are out there. But NIH has some ones that they have endorsed as some of their standard terminology, and there are a bunch that are just out there that they, to be honest, haven't gotten around to looking at yet. But if I look for a topic like COVID, keep it simple because I know there are some out there. So there is a standard term, to describe the disease severity for COVID-19. There are labels. See the full table. Okay, so you've got the full description. This is an example of one. So the severity, these are the labels. This is the definition of what all that means. So that's just an example. So you can always search and look for these kinds of elements for whatever your research area is. Fair sharing, spell it right. Okay, if I go to standards. And standards, I can do a whole workshop on that. So I'm just going to quickly show you some things. But these are going to be things like ontologies and taxonomies and so on for certain types of data. You can do things like restricting to just ones that are maintained. So it's ones that people are actually paying attention to and updating and so on. You can also restrict to, I like ready, because that means it's not ones that are still in development and they're still thinking about what the term is and it's going to change by the time you use it. So I generally encourage people to stick to at least maintained and ready when they're out there perusing various standards. But any of these, you just click on through to it. It will take you to some descriptions about it. And then there's usually a link off to their website or PDFs or whatever. So that is a couple of examples. Too far. Okay, that's a couple of examples of some of the places that you can get data standards. This is then moving on to the repositories. Okay, we've described it, we've peeled off what we're going to do, where are we putting it? So you'll be sharing what repository you plan to put it to. They absolutely do want a repository that generates some sort of unique identifier. Just like you've got a DOI link for your journal and journal articles, you want some sort of unique identifier, the equivalent of a DOI for that data, so that somebody can get to it. And just your description of when you plan to share it, how long you anticipate it being available. And the main one I'm going to look at here, NIH has some of their own repositories that they're encouraging people to use for the NIH funded data. There are also generalist repositories that have met their criteria. Those are probably your top two right there. The Texas Data Repository, I'll just mention, I don't think it's one that all would use, is generally for those Texas A&M researchers that don't have some other discipline-specific home for their data, so they can just put it out in that repository. And then that third one is just sort of for the one-offs where you've got vast amounts of data that no repository can take. You can work with, TANU IT. But the data sharing resources, okay, repositories. Okay, so these are the NIH supported ones, and this tool is very handy for finding out, okay, I have no idea what repository I can use, but I can look for my particular center that I'm working with, so I can say, okay, well, which ones do these guys look at? And this is one that they have. I can say, well, okay, leave it open, but I want to look for, I want something that takes imaging data. Okay, pain and brain MRI data, imaging data commons, and they give you details about those. So then you can then look at the details for that repository and decide, okay, is this one that might be a good home for our stuff? And you can, again, the about information will give you all the details on how long we're keeping it and what our requirements are and so on. That is the NIH one. There is also a link for generalist repositories that, again, will have been vetted by NIH as far as, okay, they at least meet our minimum standards. So if you don't have something that fits nicely with your particular discipline, you can check out, a Dataverse or a Figshare or, whatever from there. So that's just a couple of ideas for okay, where do I put it? And then once I've got it out wherever it is, or have it described wherever it's described, what are the rules? What kind of consent is required? What kind of confidentiality restrictions are out there? Again, what federal things fit into play here? I have a link again off to Texas A&M guidance as far as any of the rules that apply around here. You may just have to, maybe you're just able to share the metadata that describes it. And then they contact the PI if they want to actually use the data and involve sponsored research services and doing data use agreements and all those kinds of things. But again, you're just describing, okay, once it's out there, what can people do with it? All of this stuff, as you're looking at it, says, man, that's going to take time and probably some money. That can be part of the grant. Okay, so there are allowable costs for actually doing all of these things, curating the data, working with the repository. Some repositories may charge a fee, just kind of depends, but you can get some of that in there. Those costs need to be incurred during the performance period, though. You can't do something 2 years after the fact. And again, there's a link here for all of the budgeting and details there. And then who's responsible for all this? In general, that's going to be the PI. The PI may name some designated person as the one that keeps track of all of this, but who's the one that's responsible for making sure that all this actually happens? And the annual reporting of that and so on. Any questions so far on just that planning side of it? And I am going to point you to some more resources in a minute. No? Okay. So a lot of stuff. Texas A&M has some specific tools that will be helpful. And I have links to these. Some of these are from the Division of IT to help you with costing for infrastructure and so on. The DMP tool, which I'll get to in a minute, is especially useful for sample content, templates, those kinds of things. So I'll use that in a minute. There is some cost forecasting stuff, budget development guidelines, all those kinds of things from Texas A&M. Our library also does do research data management workshops. We don't have anything specifically scheduled this summer, but we usually do some general research data management courses, or working with sensitive data, or using the DMP tools. So keep an eye out for those. Externally, we have the, and again, I'm going to jumping over to the main site, which is, because it's a federal government site, has many, many, many links. So I'm trying to give you some direct links in the PowerPoint. But one of the research covered under the plan, that's one of those links. So again, you've got some, what counts, what doesn't, as far as the types of research. Another link, this writing a data management and sharing plan. They have some excellent links on writing, submitting, what the format needs to look like. They have a suggested PDF format. You can change, you don't have to use that format as long as you're hitting the 6 elements in your description. They suggest 2 pages worth. No, the world doesn't end if you go to 3 or 4 pages, but they're just kind of, again, giving you some guidelines. And they have some sample plans for different types of data. I will point out one of the things that's kind of bubbled up as the librarians are talking among ourselves. One of the agencies created their first sample plan and shared it with all the others, and then the others tweaked theirs. That one agency has, as part of their requirements for repositories, that a data use agreement comes into play. A lot of the other sample plans just copied that format, just like templates, be, oh yeah, that looks good, I'll use that. So there is involvement mentioned of sponsored research services in that first template. Most of the others are not going to require a data use agreement, and they're not going to involve sponsored research services. So I would just say, take a look at the sample plan for your research area. If there's something that sounds kind of weird, you can certainly feel free to change that. But just keep in mind that first template may have some oddities that ended up going through to some of the other plans. But, for example, genomic data, non-human source. And that's okay. So here's element 1 where they're talking about the data type. They've got the sections, the standards. So they're just giving you some ideas of what to work with. The other thing that is particularly useful, let me get back to the top. I am generally not a fan of FAQ pages. They just end up being this huge array of things that nobody can dig through. They have broken them out a little bit by category, and they have a search, and the search is actually fairly decent. Speaking as a librarian, so if you search by budget, you'll get 20 that actually look like decent budget justification summaries. How do I do this in the budget? How do I do that? So the search is decent. So the FAQ, they are constantly adding to it. This is new to everybody, so they're always adding stuff. There's always questions. But don't be afraid or annoyed by the FAQs on that one. And again, some other sources for cost forecasting. There are also some resources from librarians, not to be a substitute for guidance from NIH or Texas A&M. But this is a working group that has worked together. This is a open science framework folder that has, again, a bunch of checklists for doing those plans, a reference guide, some sample plans that look a little different. So by all means, check those out. That might give you some nice handy tools to work with. There are a few resources, again, that I'm going through here to, again, kind of boil down all of the huge array of things that are on the NIH site down to some 10 simple rules for maximizing the recommendations. That's an article. The video that is critical appraisal of DMP for program officers. I'll get to this in a minute, but the program officers and program staff are the ones that are actually going to be evaluating those data management plans and making recommendations and reviewing them. So this video is what the folks that are reviewing the plan are learning. So that can give you a little bit of insight into, okay, what do I really need to make sure I cover? So take a look at that video. And again, some different resources and guides. I'm again going to jump over to one of our other, and we have links to these on the library websites as well. When you sign in, go ahead and use your institutional address and then sign in with your institution. And this should look familiar to everybody. No, don't say it. Authenticate. Yes. Okay, so this is one I would suggest if you really want to get a feel for this, take maybe a prior project that you worked on and work through a pretend data management plan as if it was going to be shared. So this is a test. You can create play ones. This is one that I create, so you can just call it a project test. There's a little check box that says it's a mock project. So it's just one that you can just play with and run with. And the template you want to use, you'll tell it the funder, and then the template it'll bring up a list of templates, and the one that you want to go with, let me just do a new one here. Create plan. 2, Texas A&M. Funder is NIH. Create plan. Okay, so it's using that template for you, and where you could add in any of the other details you want, but under the right plan, here are our 6 sections. So the standards and so on. If I go to data type, they've got their instructions and they've got some sample wording. So you can do some copying and pasting, and okay, my data is imaging data and it's obtained from data, whatever the data source is. So you can use that to just kind of walk through creating that plan. And the same idea with any of the other sections. And there's usually some guidance off to the side here. DMP tool, the description stuff, again, a lot of this is coming from the librarians and the creators that work with DMP. So I definitely suggest that one. NIH has some webinars and workshops recorded out on their site. Some of them are showing their age a little bit. There's some of the earlier ones back when a lot of us were still kind of figuring this out. So if you're using theirs, stick with the newer recordings. Ones, done a year ago probably aren't going to be all that useful. Okay, so we've created our plan. We're all ready to go. And now we want to submit this thing. It's submitted with the application in that budget justification section. Peer reviewers don't see that plan. They see the budget and they can comment on that budget line if they want to, but they don't see the details of the plan. Again, the program staff are the ones that actually assess the plans once you get the award. And then, once everybody's happy, and I'll talk about that part in a minute, you absolutely have to then actually do it. And, NIH is talking about factoring into future funding decisions if you do not comply. But the assessment stuff, again, the program staff is assessing it. Is it reasonable? Does it make sense? It's only funded once that plan is complete and acceptable. So there may be some back and forth with the program staff once the award has been given that says, okay, why did you pick this repository? Well, we picked this one because, or why are you not sharing this data when you could be sharing it? Or, so there's that back and forth. If something changes during the award cycle, let's say, well, we thought this repository was going to be the one, but now we're in year 3 and we realize this other one would be a better one. You can update those. Again, it has to get the okay from the program staff that says, okay, this makes sense. And I'm sure there's emails and paperwork that goes back and forth about all that. But you can always make adjustments. And then that plan becomes part of the term and condition of the award. Every year as part of the award, you report annually on our PPR form of, hey, here's where we are on this process. NIH is going to review the compliance and so on. So they would come back with any questions or whatever. So where are we now with all of this? Any awards that went through after January 25th? From what I am hearing, I just came back from the medical librarian conference and I've talked to some folks that I know that work at NIH. Most of that just-in-time process and feedback and back and forth will be coming in over the summer. So this is sort of our first pass at, okay, what did they think of all of this? So we'll probably know more over the summer. There may be more questions coming up at that point. What I have learned from talking with other librarians that are part of the process at their institutions, there are apparently some institutions that are in total freak out mode about this whole thing and what do we do and how do we do it and whatever. A&M appears to be much calmer. It's like, okay, we'll do this thing. Everybody seems pretty chill about it. What folks that are seeing some of the plans have said is there's been a lot of copying and pasting from between award or applications. So for example, researcher one in a department does their plan. Oh, here, use my plan as the basis. And there maybe wasn't quite as much updating of researcher two's plan as made sense. So it's like, oh, just put it in the repository I used. Well, different kind of data. So maybe you should be using a different repository. So some of those kinds of things may bubble up as the new process is coming along. So there'll be some back and forth. And the thing to keep in mind is this is the program staff's first year doing this too. So we're expecting some grace on both sides as far as, them figuring out how it works, us figuring out how it works, coming together, revising, updating. I don't think anybody's going to get into serious issues if they made a legitimate effort to try to come up with the plan. And as you're working through that process, or as you get, feedback or whatever, we definitely have folks that can help with that. If you need to find a different repository, if you're not sure about repositories, if you're not sure about where to find standards, any of those kinds of things. The libraries has resources to help you at least work through some of the issues. We do not have staffing to help with actually doing, curation or, some of those kinds of things. We're still kind of recovering from some of the path forward staffing challenges. But we will certainly do what we can to help y'all out. And again, some contact info as far as where to go to get help with that. I know I kind of raced through the slides. Are there questions? Is there anything else that y'all would like to see? At either off of the websites or, hey, can we look at that other thing a little bit more detail? Either on Zoom or here in the room. No? Okay, well, feel free to reach out, and again, I'll get copies of the slides to y'all so that you can actually direct link into some of the stuff I was looking at. And thank you very much.
You are the only participant.